Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. It's time for the C3 stream. All right, guys, good evening. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Tuesday night teaching time. Glad to have you here on the stream tonight. Time for some Tuesday night teaching. Moses. And that's the plan for tonight. So glad to have you here. If you know somebody who might benefit from this, do me a favor, tag them in the comments. Let's see. Speaking of comments, let me look real quick. Yeah, nice. Joe's all over it. John, brief overview review of last week. Yep, always like to do that. Always like to do that, John. Just kind of a touch base on what we did last week as well. And in case you missed it, just so you know, as always, guys, you can go back and look on YouTube and watch those, so you can dig them up here on Facebook as well. They're automatically on YouTube, and then they are cataloged actually on YouTube to I put them in a playlist, a C3 stream playlist. There's a Thursday morning one and a Tuesday night one. So if you're interested, you can always do that. Go back and rewatch in case you missed it. So if you're new to the stream tonight, glad to have you here. We are going through a walkthrough of the Bible currently. We are doing some Bible study with Pastor Andrew, hanging out. It's relaxed, it's casual. You can make comments in the if you're tracking on Facebook, either on my personal page or in the Christ Church community page. We track on both of those comments, and also on Facebook, or excuse me, not Facebook, YouTube. That's what I'm talking about. Comments, throw questions, comments in the comment section so I can hear it. Yeah, nice. Joe, fabulous. Yes, a recap would be the Technicolor Dreamcoat with Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. Yeah, Tom Wellness, you should come join us. Tom, you would love this. Tom, I hope you're listening to this whenever you can. Check this out. We would love to have you track with us. So if you're new to the stream, guys, what we do is we sit down, we spend time together, we go into the scriptures, I show you pictures, we have conversations, you can ask questions, I do my best to respond to those, and if you ever miss a week, no big deal. You can go back and watch it. And it's just kind of a gentle walk through the Bible is what we've been doing right now. We've been doing this for a number of weeks. We're on week 7 already. There is a curriculum, a loose curriculum that we're following along. We call it the Divine Drama. That's kind of what it's called. It's based out of Crossways, which is a publishing gig. Oh, yeah. I should play my fancy intro. Should we do the fancy intro before we get to the, yeah, here we go. It's time for the Divine Drama on the C3 stream. All right, let's get up the stuff. There we go. Sweet. Okay, rocking and rolling now. So, welcome. Glad to have you here tonight. I got a big cup of tea. I think it's white tea I'm drinking tonight. My brother went to Disney World a while ago, and he brought me back tea. So whenever he travels, he looks for tea for me because he knows I'm a tea guy. So, yep, this is some of the stuff he brought back. It's some white tea. So I got a big cup of white tea tonight. I got Bible ready to go. Yeah, I'm ready. You guys ready? Should we do it? Let's do a brief recap, kind of picking you up where we left off. And that is on the story of Moses. We tackled, going back, we've been tackling this kind of family tree, if you will, starting in the beginning with Adam. Tracking all the way down through Jacob, bottom right-hand corner, and Jacob's sons. Jacob has 12 sons. It's plain white tea. Absolutely. I drink all my tea with nothing added. I'm that guy. 12 sons, and one of the sons is named Joseph. Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat is the story, famous, yada yada, good stuff. Joseph eventually passes away, and as he passes away, his descendants become more abundant. They become referred to as the Hebrew people. Hebrew, Hebrew. The word Jewish actually didn't occur till much later. So when we, in our vernacular and every day, we refer to the Jewish people, you have to work back. They've actually gone through a couple different iterations of names. Okay, the Jewish people have actually been called other things before that. Yes, I know that's confusing. But before they were known as the Jewish people, they were known as, peppermint bark tea. That sounds good, Joe. I would try that. That sounds like a Christmas, like very Christmassy, a peppermint tea. I do like peppermint tea in Christmas time. Before they were known as Jews, they were known as both Israelites. And that is because Jacob's name was changed to Israel. He had one name. God changed it to a different name. He was first called Jacob, and then he started going by the name Israel. So his descendants, Jacob's descendants, Israel's descendants, are referred to as Israelites. You're probably familiar with Israel because of the country, right? That Jewish people live in the country of Israel, for example, right? As just not all of them, I know, but bear with me. Okay, you get what I'm saying. Israel, and so they were known as Israelites, and as well as Israelites, they were known before that as Hebrews. So Joseph's descendants, the Hebrews, are living in, at this point in time in the biblical narrative, they're living in a point of great oppression. Not a highlight, not a great time in the Jewish tradition. This is not on the highlight reel. Hebrew nation, so large numbers of Hebrew people, okay, not just like a family of 75 or 100 like Jacob's original family, but many generations later they have multiplied, and because they continue to multiply, the local pharaoh starts getting nervous that these Hebrew people, who are really foreigners living in Egypt, they came down for food and they stayed. He gets nervous that they're getting more and more plentiful, and be getting more and more plentiful means more and more powerful. So because they're getting more powerful, he goes out of his way to place them in bondage, subjugating the whole Hebrew people, right? I mean, just kind of like, if you're Hebrew, you are now a slave. A caste system is implemented where Hebrew people are considered second rate. They are considered slaves by birth. And then you have the Egyptian people. And the Egyptian people are, the better people in their view. And so the Egyptian people are overseers, and the Hebrew people just end up being the slave labor that builds the country of Egypt at this time in the biblical narrative. And of course, ruling over all of Egypt is a guy named Pharaoh. So in this picture, let's talk about this picture for a moment. You can see kind of this image of Pharaoh, kind of top center. It's broken apart, but there's kind of like this Pharaoh figurehead, if you will. And an arrow is breaking it up. And the arrow, if you track it back, goes to this circle within a circle with some arrows coming out. That is our image for God. A circle with arrows going out from it. The idea there being that God, in his character, when we get to know God and see who he is throughout the Bible, he is perfect, like a circle is perfect and unbroken. God is perfect. And yet his orientation and his concern is outward oriented. He is concerned with others as opposed to being concerned with himself. So the arrows going outward are an indicator of God's character. And this is a good example of how we see that happening. God's concern here is for the Jewish or the Hebrew people who are living in bondage and in slavery to Pharaoh. God had promised their forefathers, the patriarchs, we talked about them, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the three patriarchs. God had promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that he would be their God, he would walk with them, he would care for them, that they would actually be the vehicle by which God would rescue the whole world, that this one family, through this guy named Abraham, would be the starting point for God rescuing every family. The whole earth, right? The human family, the creation family. And so God has heard the cries and is sensitive to this particular family as they are in the midst of some serious slave labor. Now, one particular character we begin to track with. His name is Moses. Moses. We start tracking with a guy named Moses in Exodus. Exodus is the chapter, the book of the Bible. Chapter. The book of the Bible that we are in is called Exodus. 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 And it is the story of Exodus, exiting Exodus. Moses is the next major player. He appears in this context. The Hebrews are being enslaved. Pharaoh goes so far as to actually to curb the multiplication factor of the Hebrews. Apparently, they're quite a fertile people, if you will, and they are multiplying fast. And so Pharaoh ends up saying, "Hey, all the baby boys, we got to start killing off the population. We got to get the population management." Is basically what he starts to cull the herd, and so he actually ends up asking his soldiers to commanding his soldiers to kill the boys of the Hebrew men and women. And so one of those boys, however, by virtue of the bravery of the mother, ends up surviving, and in fact ends up being raised. The mom sends little Moses floating down the river in a basket because she doesn't want to hand him over to the soldiers. So she cries to herself, places him in a basket, and says, "It's better for him to just be pushed off into the great unknown. Maybe he'll have a chance. Better for me not to see it. The soldiers are going to kill him right in front of my eyes. Better not to witness it." So she places her baby boy in a basket and pushes him into the Nile. He floats down the Nile and just so happens, dare I say divine appointment, to float up next to Pharaoh's palace, and gets Pharaoh's daughter is down bathing at the time, sees this helpless little baby, and decides to adopt him. So this boy, who is a Hebrew ethnically, is raised by Pharaoh's daughter. So he's raised as kind of this half and half. Everybody knows that he's a Hebrew. And it's pretty obvious that he's a Hebrew, right? Floated down the river, Hebrew baby. But he's raised, adopted into the Pharaoh's family. And so he's got half of his identity grounded in what it means to be a Prince of Egypt. Did you guys see that movie? You guys told me last week it was like Pixar or something. Yeah, Disney or Pixar, I forget. But DreamWorks, that's what you guys told me. Maybe DreamWorks. Prince of Egypt is the DreamWorks rendition of this story. He grows up under the influence, with the affluence, with the language and culture of the Egyptians, and yet has that backdrop and ethnicity, a tie to the Hebrew people as well. So he grows up as kind of this man of both worlds, and ends up getting in some trouble, right? Grows up, gets in trouble. And I mean, the trouble's pretty profound. The guy, Moses, kills somebody. I mean, come on. That's not like your run-of-the-mill, little issue. No, he's got an issue. He's got a big problem. He ends up seeing one of the overseers, the slave drivers, driving slaves. He sees his slave driver beating a Hebrew person to death, intervenes, and in doing so, kills the Egyptian slave driver. And apparently there were witnesses, because word gets around. In the end, he ends up having to flee. He books it. He's like, "I'm out of here. Peace. See ya. It is no longer safe for me here." Egyptian rule and law would say, Pharaoh, time to die. Excuse me, not Pharaoh. Moses, time to die. Pharaoh wants to kill Moses because that's the rule of the law. Eye for eye, hand for hand, foot for foot, life for life. And so Moses flees Pharaoh, runs away into the wilderness, takes off, gets out of Dodge. He does not hide among the Hebrew people. In fact, one of the Hebrew people actually accuse him, get in his face and confront him, saying, "Hey, we saw what you did there, buddy." So the Hebrew people don't like him because he's Egyptian in their eyes. The Egyptians don't like him because he's Hebrew in their eyes and killed one of the Egyptians. So he has no home and takes off into the desert, so to speak. I'll use the term desert. I'll use the term wilderness as well, kind of synonymous. When I use that term desert and wilderness, Arabian Peninsula, yes, lots of sand, but probably thinking more along the lines of nomadic goat sheep herder. So pretty barren, pretty rocky, arid, dry land, kind of going and herding sheep and goats where you can. He takes up the job of being a shepherd. He runs away, ends up connecting with a local nomadic traveling family, a tribesman, a nomadic tribe, and marries into it. Marries a woman, grows up, has kids. So time is passing. He's an adult male. He's a guy. He's a man, and he's got a family, and he's hanging out, tending flocks for his new family, for the family he marries into, for his father, whose name is Jethro. So Moses has abandoned his roots, created a new life for himself. And really, you get every indication that he has really severed ties with Egypt, has no interest in going back, and is really ready to grow up, grow old, love his kids, love his wife, and be a shepherd until the rest of his days. Buried the past behind him. Wants nothing to do with it. Moved on. You know what I mean? And then something happens. Should we read about it? Here we go. Let's check it out together. Exodus chapter 3. Boom. Famous story. Christians, non-Christians might have bumped into this story, even non-Christians might have, because it's like that famous. Moses and the Burning Bush. Moses is out tending the flock for his father-in-law, Jethro. And as he's walking around, he is in the wilderness. He came to a mountain, and this becomes very important in a while. Oh, excuse me. Whew. Should be drinking coffee. Had a long day. I don't know about you guys. I have literally been in my office, in this basement office, since 8 o'clock this morning, with 1 hour exception, where I went up and had dinner with the girls. Now I'm back. Woo. Hence the tea. All right, so he flees off into the wilderness, and he comes to this place called Sinai, Mount Sinai. Sometimes it is referred to as Horeb. Very confusing, I know. Names, languages in the Bible, it gets really confusing really fast. So sometimes the Bible calls it Mount Horeb, sometimes the Bible calls it Mount Sinai. Kind of depends. There's reasons for it, local dialects, historical context, the year in which the text was written, etc., etc. Don't get caught up on it. But Horeb, Sinai, same mountain. Same mountain. Famous mountain. This is why. He's hanging out on this mountain, just like tending the herds. And you'll notice that right after we get this introduction of Sinai, it follows up with this phrase, the mountain of God. Mountain of God. Mount Sinai will become one of the most important and substantial geographic locations in the ancient world, period. Historians and archaeologists debate where it is, which mountain, etc., because it's really significant in the Bible. And it's hard to pinpoint and say for sure this is what it is. It's kind of one of those things that's like lost to the ages. But it's really important because from here on out, this mountain, Sinai, will become the geographic reference point for the Hebrew people. Everything that follows in the story, this is big. Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb. Even when you get to generations later, a lot of people, like, for example, think that there's a famous story of Elijah who goes to a mountain and listens for the whisper of God. Oof. Sorry, guys. I'm trying. I need like 5-hour energy. I've never actually taken that stuff. Tea, coffee. Elijah supposedly might have, for example, he goes to a mountain. Famous thing happens with this guy, Elijah, who's literally hundreds of years after this. But a lot of people say Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, that was the place he went. So I share that with you to say that once we get introduced to this mountain, this is the first time we see it, for the rest of the Old Testament, it's a big deal. And it gets referred to as the mountain of God for many reasons. Most notably, God keeps showing up there. At this mountain, an angel of the Lord appears to Moses in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it did not burn up. This is amazing, Moses says. Right? So, actually, ironically, the Prince of Egypt does a really good personal interpretation here. But to capture the sense of what the Bible is trying to convey here, I feel like the Prince of Egypt, actually, that movie does a good job, at least in terms of cartoons, trying to communicate the significance of what's taking place here. This is not like Moses stumbles up and sees a forest fire. Okay, this is not a little forest fire. This is a supernatural experience, the kind that when Moses comes up, his skin is tingling. He's looking around thinking, what in the world? This is not normal. This is not your normal average fire that you just kind of like walk up to and warm your hands on, okay? Moses doesn't just like walk up to this fire and pull out some marshmallows and sit down to make some s'mores, okay? He's not making s'mores on this kind of fire. This is something different. This is something unique. This is something supernatural. And as we find, this is God in God's presence, seeking to speak to Moses, seeking to reveal himself. In fancy terms, this is called a theophany, or a God revealing. That's what theophany means. This is where God definitively, actually, reveals himself to Moses in a way that Moses can look at this burning bush and be like, this is supernatural. This is amazing, Moses said. Why isn't the bush burning up? I gotta go check that out. I must go see it. And so that's what he does. When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush. So God actually uses this burning bush to capture his attention, draw him close, and then he starts a conversation. Moses, Moses, here I am. Do not come any closer, the Lord warned. Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. All right, so this is, this is a big deal. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. So this is God definitively declaring, I am the God who has been attached to and connected to you and your family throughout the generations, going all the way back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are that which define the Hebrew people. You are Hebrew if you come from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So God is, he's been God is choosing at this moment to connect with this particular person in such a way as to connect him back and remind him of his ethnic lineage and heritage, as well as coinciding with that, connecting himself to that ethnicity and lineage, that heritage. It's substantial. When Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. I would be too. Woo, hot dang. Any questions? You guys tracking with me? Okay. Throw them in the comments. I don't see any right now. The Lord said to him, I have seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So this is good. This is big. This is God saying, look, I take note of the challenges, difficulties, and struggles of the world. Like, I see the struggles and the pain of people. I am not ignorant. I am not distant. I am not sleeping in heaven, taking a nap while everybody's toiling. I care about these things. Okay? I am aware of and sensitive to. Who wrote this section, and is this dialogue from the oral tradition? Moses passing down the story to next generation. It's wild that the actual dialogue is captured. Yes, good question, Joe. I mean, so yes, this would have been oral tradition prior to written tradition. According to the Bible, the literal translation and literal interpretation, Moses would have communicated this, captured this, written this down. He would have been the generator, the progenitor of all of this. First 5 books of the Bible, tradition goes to Moses. Now, that's a bit complicated, as you can tell. So modern scholarship finds that there are a couple different voices that track in the first 5 books of the Bible. We can tell that by syntax. We can tell that by language, word choice. A simple example would be depending on how people refer to God. So sometimes he was referred to as God. Sometimes he's referred to as the Lord. A simple example would be the difference between using and referring to God as Elohim over and against Yahweh. Okay, so depending on which Hebrew word is chosen, there's probably a different voice coming to bear. Now, that in no way depreciates or negates the significance of the story, or more importantly, what God is trying to speak in and through within the story. All right, so theoretically, these are things that Moses would have passed down, within the context of the greater narrative. So he's sitting around someday with the little Jewish boys and girls, and he's sitting around teaching them these stories. He's telling them these things. And eventually these were impressed upon and repeated so many times and in such great detail that it was established as oral tradition. As we're going to see later on in a little bit, we're going to actually get to, like, for example, where we get more like what I would describe as law code. Moses' law. Moses is the lawgiver. And those would have been extremely detailed, extremely precise, the level of accountability that would have gone with those would have been through the roof, right? And so these stories would have been given through Moses after the fact of the experience, first within oral tradition and then written down later on. Good question. So, yeah. So this is probably Moses kind of recounting, if you will. With divine help. Let's not diminish the significance of the divine guiding hand and intervention. We've got to be careful with my word choice so I don't get a bunch of emails. Yeah. we have to do the balance of recognizing the human voice and yet the divine work, will, power, and ultimately the divine voice within the human world and context. We're kind of radical that we believe God actually speaks through people and uses people, like, for example, Moses. Then the Lord told him, I have certainly heard all this oppression, tough stuff. I am aware of the suffering. Great question. If you guys got more questions, pound them out. Love it in the comments. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. So, pretty self-explanatory. I hear the pain, I'm aware, and I am intervening. I'm going to bring them to the land that I had promised way back when. The land from before that Abraham kind of stumbled his way through. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob spent time in. It's time to go back to ancient Israel, you know? Get them out of Egypt, man. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. The land where the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, the Hivites, and Jebusites all live. Look! The cry of the people of Israel has reached me, and I have seen how harshly the Egyptians abuse them. End result? Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people, Israel, out of Egypt. So again, Israel here is being referred to as like a nation state over and against a geographic location. That's it. Now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh. Go back to whence you came. Head on back, Moses. Time to head on back home. Back to Egypt. We got work to do. We gotta free them from Pharaoh and lead them out of Egypt. This is why it is referred to as Exodus. Moses has a lot of back and forth on this. He's not too hot on this idea. You know, who in the world do you think I am, God? I'm not the kind of guy to lead people. Are you nuts? God just kind of like being patient. Look, I'll be with you. Don't worry about it. In fact, I promise you that I will be with you. And to prove it, when you bring people out of Egypt, you are going to come and worship me on this very mountain, Sinai, Horeb. You will come here. I promise, as a sign that I am ultimately the one behind all of this, you're going to come here. Just wait. It's going to happen. Moses, I don't know. I'm just not so sure about this idea. He's hemming and hawing. He gives this complaint. He says, look, if people ask me, you know, if I go to them and say, hey, the God of your ancestors sent me, they're going to say, oh yeah, what's his name? Then what am I supposed to say? You just picture God like, you know, palm to the forehead here, being like, Moses, all right. I appreciate the patience with which God gently brings Moses along, simply because I think that's what God does for a lot of us, right? God is gentle and kind and patient with us. And how many times, you know, often there are times and moments in our life where perhaps God wants to bring something about or do something or call us into something, and just so consistently we're just hemming and hawing, dragging our feet, stumbling along. I'm just not sure, God. And God just continually, kindly, gently brings us forward, right? Just works with us instead of against us. And that's what he's doing with Moses. So here you go again. God patiently responds. And it's actually a big, big response. Here we have God's name. The great I am. I am who I am. I will be what I will be. Yeah. The tense of this verbiage is, the tense of this sentence is complex. So I am has sent me to you. So this Yahweh. So a couple things. One, you would never see these vowels in traditional Hebrew scripture. You would never actually see. You're not allowed to write God's name in the Bible. Yes, I know how silly that sounds, but it's true. You're actually technically not supposed to write God's name in the Hebrew tradition. To name something, to use someone's name, is to have power over that person in the historical context. And so if you go to Hebrew, it's actually missing the A and the E. That's the workaround. So you'll see Y, H, W, H. We put in the vowels as Christians. We put them in because we have a different... We're not so concerned the same way the Jewish tradition has interpreted. The Jewish tradition is just interpreted in such a way that you're not supposed to do that. We as Christians come back and we're like, really? Are you sure that's what God meant? So here you go. Perfect. See, hit the footnotes, PA. Here we go. Yahweh. It is a transliteral. It is the literal translation of the proper name. And here's what you find. There you go. YHWH. That is sometimes rendered Yehovah. So some of you have heard of like Jehovah Witness and stuff like that. It all comes back to this. That's what it comes from. In this translation, so this is the NLT. So in the New Living Translation, whenever you see the Lord, and the Lord is in small caps. So you can see how O-R-D is actually in a lower, it's in capitals, but it's in a lower, smaller. That's probably, yeah, smaller, not lower. It's in capital letters, but it's in small capital letters. Anytime you see that in the translation, let's see if we can find one. So like, for example, the God, this would be Elohim as opposed to the Lord. That would be Yahweh. So Elohim means God. Yahweh is like his first name. Okay? It's like his first name. That's a big deal. It's a big deal. God gave Moses, and this is the first time we see this, the level of intimacy and vulnerability that comes with giving one's own name. And in that historical context and in historical Jewish theology, when you had the ability to speak one's name, particularly in relationship to theology and the gods, you were on equal level with them or on intimate par relationship with them. So for God to go so far as to say and give his name, this is huge. This is big. This cannot be underscored enough. This is God being vulnerable. And back in the olden days, that was like, you didn't do that. Gods weren't vulnerable. They were all powerful and strong, and you know, the idea of vulnerability with the context of a divinity is a big deal. So there you go. Little history lesson, little language lesson for you. So, oh, there you go again. Look at that. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I told you guys we'd see this refrain all the time, and we've seen it just twice in this chapter alone. This is my eternal name, my name to be remembered for all generations. Pretty cool. Now, go and call together all the elders of Israel. Tell them, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me. He told me, I've been watching closely. I see how everything's going on. It's bad. It's time to get out of Dodge. And God seems pretty confident they're going to accept your message. Then you got to go to the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, that's who that would be, and tell him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. So please let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. So Moses is supposed to, one, go to the Hebrew people and say, hey, Your God remembers you and is here for you, and he's up to something really big, guys. And then you're supposed to go to Pharaoh and say, Pharaoh, we need a 3-day vacation where we can worship our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand forces him. So God is already saying, like, you know, Moses, what I'm asking you is actually no small thing. Like, we got some big work in front of us. I am going to end up performing all kinds of miracles, and at last he will let you go. So, jumping back, boom. That's exactly what happens. Is that I don't want to go into the details of it here. If you want to go into the details of it, you can, read it. That's the best move. Read it in the Bible. Chapters 7 through 10. Chapters 7 through 10 of Exodus go into the details of the 10 plagues. You guys ever heard of the 10 plagues before? Kind of a big deal. Some really trippy, weird stuff happens. Crazy miracles. First off, Moses goes to the Hebrew people, and it happens just the way God said. They're like, who? What? Huh? What? Huh? God? Our God? He cares about us? Wow, we have a God? Wow, we forgot about him. And so there's kind of a jump start of faith within the Hebrew people, and then Moses goes to Pharaoh. It says, Pharaoh, let my people go. And Pharaoh's like, nah, man, that ain't happening. In fact, Pharaoh ends up making him work harder. He says, look, you wanted time off? I'm going to double the ante. Now you got to make me bricks without hay. You got to make and work twice as hard in order to do and hit your quotas. So this is back and forth, back and forth. And the real challenge here is not Moses versus Pharaoh, but is God versus the perception of Pharaoh. As this is a God battle. That's what's taking place here. That's why on this picture, on this graphic, you see in the bottom left-hand side, there are a couple different things there. You see two little idols is what those are. Two little figurines. Those are idols. Idol is the term the Bible uses for I don't know, gods that are not gods. Idols is the term that used for, we have idols. Idols are whatever we worship as a god. That's not a real god. We idolize them. They're idols. They're false gods, if you will. And Egypt was riddled with false gods. Most notably, Pharaoh. Pharaoh himself was considered divine. And so what's happening here is not Moses taking on Pharaoh, but really Yahweh taking on the Egyptian understanding and theology and belief system. This is a war of gods. That's what's really happening here. And most notably, we get an example of that when in the bottom left-hand side, you see a little staff and a snake. You guys see that in the bottom left-hand side? The staff and the snake. There's a story in here where Moses and Aaron is kind of his right-hand man. Moses and Aaron are buddies, right-hand man. They're brothers, actually, biologically. And Moses meets up with his brother. His brother actually becomes a big figurehead for him, kind of like his second in command, if you will. And they both confront Pharaoh. They go to Pharaoh's palace and they say, hey, let my people go. Pharaoh says, no, you have no proof. This is all madness, not going to happen. You think your God is powerful. Our gods are powerful. Bring me my priests and magicians. And so Pharaoh's priests and magicians show up. And it's basically Moses and Aaron versus the priests and magicians. And they throw down their staffs. They're carrying staffs, like walking sticks. And the walking sticks become snakes. Woo! That's trippy. That's straight out of like Harry Potter, man. Transfiguration type. Whoa! The walking sticks, actually, God performs a supernatural miracle and changes the continuity to become snake. So staff becomes snake. And the magicians and the priests are like, yeah, well, our gods can do that too. And believe it or not, they do some weird heebie-jeebie stuff, and their staffs become snakes. Now you got a bunch of snakes. However, the Bible goes out of its way to talk about how the snakes then do battle. I'm telling you, the Bible's cool, guys. There's some trippy, cool stuff in the Bible. One example would be this, where the snakes do battle, and Moses and Aaron, Moses' staff, his snake, eats the other snakes. Yeah, that's cool. It is a theological statement here affirming what I said just a moment ago. The battle here is not between Moses and Pharaoh. It's not even between Egypt and the Hebrew people. What's at stake and what's at battle here is God and God's reputation over and against the false faiths that wreak havoc in our world and lead people to end up being like the Egyptians, obsessed with production and their own power and their own influence and their own wealth and affluence, and creating caste systems and putting people down and pushing themselves up and climbing the ladder in such a way that there are higher ups and there are lower downs, and there's this juxtaposition of power and the oppressed and the haves and the have-nots, and et cetera, et cetera. God shows up and he just like, nah, man, that's not how I roll. God is far more interested in rescue, healing, and as we're going to find out probably next week with the Ten Commandments and what God sets up, God establishes a radically different way of living. He's not interested in rescuing the Hebrew people so that they can make their own Egypt. Moses is not to become another Pharaoh. No way. Moses has to become whom God hoped, designed, and desired people to be from the beginning. The mistake here is not Moses. The mistake here is Egypt and what has happened as a result of Egypt chasing down false realities and creating their own systems of self-service and self-substantiation. God is upheaving, upturning, turning over the tables. He is the upside down kingdom. He's throwing all that stuff to the wind and saying, nope, that is not what I designed for people. So there's this big conflict that happens. 10 big plagues happen. The last plague is the worst and most significant. It is referred to as the plague of death. And basically what happens is it's almost like Egypt and Pharaoh only understand in the end violence, that their self-serving systems and faith constructs have led them to only understand and relate to violence and death. That's like the only thing they'll understand and fear. And so God actually calls upon death itself to visit Egypt and sends the angel of death, sends this plague that kills all the firstborn males of the Egyptians. In the same way we started this story with Moses, where the Hebrew boys were all getting killed, now we find God saying, you will only understand violence and death and pain and hurt. I mean, you got to figure this breaks God's heart. This is counter to God's character. But it's the only way to reach the broken stone heart of Pharaoh. And this is an immensely important moment in the Bible. Let's read about it. This is called Passover. When we read the story of Jesus celebrates Passover. This becomes arguably the most important experience, if you will, in the Hebrew faith to this very day. It's like the high holy days are significant, and this is like the first, biggest, greatest of high holy days. Yom Kippur is up there, but I mean, Passover is Passover, man. And this is Passover. Passover gets its name from death literally passing over the Hebrew people and instead attacking the Egyptian people. While the Israelites were still in the land of Egypt, the Lord gave the following instructions to Moses and Aaron. From now on, this month will be the first month of the year for you. Announce to the whole community of Egypt that community of Israel, that on the 10th day of this month, each family must choose a lamb or a young goat for sacrifice, one animal for each household. If a family is too small to eat an animal whole, let them share it with another family in the neighborhood. Divide the animal according to the size, yada, 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 yada. This is where we get the term Passover lamb. God wants everybody to take a lamb and sacrifice it. And when they sacrifice it, the whole assembly, that is to say the whole nation, all the Israelites of the community, must slaughter the lamb or the young goat at twilight. And then they're to take some of the blood and smear it on the side and the top of the door frames of their houses where they eat the animal. So go to your house, sacrifice the animal, kill the animal, sacrifice the animal, with prayer and supplication and ritual. Take the blood, and as a tangible expression and participation in this, take that blood and smear it on the doorposts of your home. Okay? That same night, they must roast the meat over a fire, eat it along with bitter salad greens. This all has significance, guys. We don't have that much time to go into it tonight. And bread made without yeast. Have you guys ever seen or noticed, for example, at church, the bread that we use actually for communion has no yeast. It does not rise. And it goes all the way back to this experience. And these bitter salad greens, all of this is important. The bitter salad greens are supposed to be eaten as a reminder in the Passover meal for the Jewish people of how bitter their experience in Egypt was. Eat something that tastes nasty so that you remember how nasty your life was. And make some bread that doesn't have time to rise. That's what yeast does. Yeast takes time to make the bread rise. And God says, there's no time. We got to get you out of here. You are going to flee Egypt. You don't have time to wait for the bread to rise. So make it without yeast. Okay? And so be fully dressed, wear your sandals, carry a walking stick. Eat the meal with urgency, for this is the Lord's Passover. On that night, I will pass through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn son and firstborn male animal in the land of Egypt. I will execute judgment against who? All the gods of Egypt. That's the battleground. That's the war. This is a holy war. God versus the gods of Egypt. For I am the Lord. But, so he's going to kill everything in Egypt, every firstborn son and firstborn male animal, he's going to kill. But the blood on your doorposts will serve as a sign, marking the houses where you're staying. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. And this plague of death will not touch you when I strike the land of Egypt. So as long as you did this Passover lamb, you will get passed. Death will pass over you. Okay, you will not be touched by death. The mourning and the pain and the suffering, the loss, it's not going to be yours. This is a day to remember. Each year, from generation to generation, you must celebrate it as a special festival to the Lord. This is a law for all time. And he goes into more and more detail. Okay. More and more detail. So this is all really, 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 really significant. Here we go. So the people of Israel did as the Lord commanded through Moses and Aaron. So they all made these sacrificial lambs and spread it on their doorpost. At that night at midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn, even the firstborns, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn son of the prisoner in the dungeon. So anyone who participates and anyone who supports the Egyptian empire, the Egyptian way of life, the Egyptian definition of what humanity is and what humanity should be, they are included in this punishment, in this pain, in this loss. Only those who have sacrificed a lamb and spread it on the doorposts as a sign that they are committed to Yahweh, Elohim, the Hebrew God, are safe. Even the firstborn of their livestock are killed. Pharaoh, all of his officials, all over, they wake up during the night, and there's a loud wailing heard throughout the land of Egypt. And this echoes the loud wailing that was heard in the beginning of the story when Pharaoh commands that all the Hebrew firstborn and babies be killed. Okay, so moral of the story: violence. There's a bunch of moral of the story, but one thing: violence begets violence. Violence begets violence. The violence of Pharaoh and the violence of this Egyptian way of life led to violence in and of themselves as well, reciprocated. It's all that they could understand. Isn't that sad? It's just sad. So when we talk Passover lamb, then in the Gospel of John, New Testament, I just made a big change there. We just skipped a lot, in case you noticed. The Gospel of John, which has to do with Jesus, Jesus is referred to over and over again as the Lamb of God. The whole sacrificial system that Hebrew adopts for worship is predicated upon these orders, predicated upon this. The whole animal sacrifice system is kind of like built around this, okay? A lamb is sacrificed so that God's judgment would pass over those marked by that blood. And Jesus, the Gospel of John, picks this up in a strong way and wants you to see, know, and understand that Jesus is that. Jesus is the Passover Paschal Lamb. He is the one through which God's judgment and wrath passes over us who are covered under the blood of Jesus, under the blood and the sacrifice of him as our lamb, as we, so to speak, spread his blood upon the doorposts of our home, as we, adopt ourselves into his family and become, as we dedicate ourselves to him and his person and his sacrifice, we then are exempt from the violence, the death. We are called out of and no longer defined by nor subject to how Egypt and Pharaoh defined humanity. So this is big. The next day, Pharaoh sent Moses sent for Moses and Aaron during the night. So Moses' own son is dead. Firstborn son dies. And he says, get out. Leave. Take them all. Get out of here. Go worship the Lord. Take your flocks, take your herds, take everything. Leave. Your God wins. All the Egyptians urged the people of Israel to get out of the land as quickly as possible, for they thought, we'll all die. So for the first time, the Egyptian people look at the Hebrews, and it's only through death, pain, and violence that they are brought to a place where they themselves are threatened and therefore are willing to let them go. Not out of charity, not out of love, not out of grace, not out of kindness, not out of for sake of the neighbor, but only out of sake of self-preservation are they eventually motivated to say go. So that's what happens. Egypt chases him down. Whoa! It's 8:29. Holy cow. All right. Let's finish with this. Egyptians chase him down. And what's sad about this is that shortly after he says let him go, he changes his mind again and says kill them all. Shortly after, as soon as the pain has taken root and some of the violence is past, the initial shock of the violence is past, Pharaoh's response is once again to turn to more violence. And so he says, go and kill them all. They're trapped. Chase them down. God warns them. It says, hey, this is all going to happen. What have we done letting them get away? What have we done letting our slave labor leave? And by letting our slave labor leave, letting our economic system, our cultural system, everything's in jeopardy. Our very way of life is at stake here. What have we done? So, the Egyptians chased after him. And there's this big moment. Escape through the Red Sea. Have you guys ever heard the Red Sea thing? There's this big moment where Moses raises his hand over the sea and the Lord opens a path through the water with a strong east wind. So it's another supernatural moment of deliverance. This is kind of actually the exclamation point on the Exodus. It is almost baptismal that by passing through the waters, we find deliverance. Egyptians follow, and it's very sad. So there's a lot of, Joe, you mentioned before, like oral tradition and all this sort of stuff. There's some beautiful work in here in terms of language and storytelling. The Red Sea also in Hebrew, it transliterates as reed, R-E-E-D, like reeds, like the Reed Sea. And God actually causes all of their chariots to get stuck. The chariots were the representation of all of Egypt's power. I mentioned this last week. They're like the tank. The ultimate fighting machine in the old world was the chariot. If you had chariots, we were in charge. And so God causes their weapons of mass destruction, the chariots, to actually get stuck in this reedy water, in the waters. When all the Israelites had reached the other side of the Red Sea, God says to Moses, raise your hand over the sea again, and the waters will rush back over and cover the Egyptians and their chariots and their charioteers. And so that's what happens. The water comes rushing back in, and none of the Egyptians survive. And that's it. When the people of Israel saw the mighty power of the Lord that the Lord had unleashed against the Egyptians, they were filled with awe before him, and they put their faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses. That last line is absolutely critical. They put their faith in the Lord and their servant Moses. So God, by and through Moses and Aaron and these plagues, these 10 supernatural events, and then finally through this supernatural event at the Red Sea, brings the Hebrew people to a place of belief and faith in him. At this point in time, up until now, the Hebrew people are just kind of like stumbling along. They don't quite get it. They've kind of forgotten this whole God thing, and they're just rediscovering it, if anything, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this is kind of that moment where now they really see, like, oh my goodness, this Yahweh guy is real. Over all these generations, we've been told the Egyptian gods are real, but wow, this is our God, and he is real. Our God is the real God, and he delivers. So here you go. I was going to show you guys this. Oh, you guys can't hear it, can you? See if I can capture the audio. Hold on. I don't know if you guys can capture this, but I'm trying. Haha! There he is. Charlton Heston. Woo! Because that's exactly how it happened. Woo! Everybody's cheering. This is a famous scene, guys. 1956. Look at that guy.
God opens the sea with the blast of his nostrils.
I gotta leave you on a high note.
Lead them through the midst of the waters. His will be done. He opens the waters before them.
Oh, there's Pharaoh.
And he bars our way with fire. Let us go from this place. Men cannot fight against a God.
Better to die in battle with a God than live in shame.
Praise God and down into it!
There they go. Run, everybody! Look at the goats. Oh, big moment, big moment, big moment. All right. I'm just having fun now. So there you go. How's that? We'll finish with that for tonight. A great moment. This is a huge story, guys, and really is the big story moving forward. Everything kind of hinges on this moment called the Exodus as the Jewish people move forward. This is how they begin to define themselves according to this God who delivered them, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who delivered them out of Egypt. So we're going to pick up next week where we see what God does with them next, which is set up and establish the Hebrew people as a nation state. Now that he's delivered them from Egypt and said, Egypt is not the way to be human, I will show you a better way to be human. That's exactly what God tries to do. He gives them the laws through Moses, and he sets up what we actually have now to this very day, modern day, the Mosaic law that the Hebrew people and now the Jewish people continue to strive to follow. So, yeah. Let me check. So 8:37. I ran a little bit over. Oh, Trudy just asked a question. How do you see God's hand? How do you see God's hand in the plague we have now, COVID-19? Complicated question, Trudy. That's actually a really complicated question. I would not compare COVID-19 to the 10 plagues that we see in Exodus, because the 10 plagues that we have in Exodus, it's true that we use that term plague, and it transliterates like we would use the term plague right now for COVID-19, but it's got in its language the nuance and flexibility to allow for a wider perception. What I mean by that is like a plague of frogs is one of the plagues. Okay, we refer to them as a plague, but do you really think of a bunch of frogs as the same thing as COVID-19? So I'm a little nuanced and worried about how we do some word choice on that. I wouldn't compare the 10 plagues in Exodus to the plague that we see right now in relation. Like, I don't think it's apples to apples, if that makes sense. It's more like an apple and an orange. That said, I do think that with COVID-19, we can see how God can use, and I think this is a big part of what God does, is he takes bad, difficult, challenging circumstances and situations and can actually work with them to bring about good. And actually, this is a good example in that regard. Theologically, we can see and look to our time tonight as a study where God had this was a really poor, bad, terrible, time to be in existence as a Hebrew person, a horrible time of oppression and slavery. And yet God worked in and through that slavery and in and through it as actually a way to form he took the bad and did something good with it. Namely, he created a way forward out of the bad, out of the slavery, and also used it as a way to form and fashion a people who were hungry for deliverance, ready to put their faith in God, God of deliverance, right? And so God in that way took a bad situation, just like we have COVID-19, took a bad situation, and even though he may not be responsible, like the Egyptians were the ones responsible for enslaving enslaving the Hebrew people, God still used the slavery of the Hebrew people and, so to speak, made the most of it by seeing it as an opportunity to prepare them for faith in him, which is exactly what we just read at the very end there, right? That the Hebrew people who had forgotten about him, forgot about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? Now, through witnessing all that took place, were ready and prepared to put their faith in God and in Moses. And so in that regard, I think there's a good parallel with COVID-19. Word of the day, theophany. There you go. Love it, Joe. Yeah, theophany. Theo and break the word in half. Theo and phany. The latter half of the word comes from the Greek word. Oh, I'd have to look it up. I'm not gonna embarrass myself. I'd have to look it up. But it means to reveal. Theophany is God revealed, is what that means. So, yeah, there we go, guys. That is another lesson. If you got more questions, throw them in the comments. I'll always try to respond to them as best as I can. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight. A couple things before we go. As always, you guys know me. I love to throw some stuff up there. There's a bunch of ways to hang out with Christ Church. A lot of good things going on. You guys know all that stuff already. And if you don't, head on over to ChristChurch.life. Lots of good things. If you're new to Christ Church, by the way, we just scheduled the next Explorers Luncheon. So I'd love to tell you more about many of the different things related to Christ Church. Go to the ChristChurch.life page and you can find some next steps there. Thanks for hanging out with me as part of that expression of ways to grow in your faith and kind of deepen your faith on Tuesday nights. Love that. You can, of course, join us. Please do Sunday mornings, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10:30, doing a sermon series called Give Thanks. And you can join us on site or online. Invite somebody as you do it, whether it's on site or online. Invite somebody to come and be a part of it as well. And then 7:30 a.m., this coming 7:30 a.m., you can join me for Thursday morning meditation. Tuesday night teaching and Thursday morning meditation. We do prayer, we do scripture readings, and Holy Spirit shout-outs. It's a lot of fun. So thanks for joining me tonight. Sorry I ran over a little bit, but hope you have a wonderful rest of the evening. God bless you. Go be Christ Church. Go lift some lives, elevate Christ. Go be a church for those who aren't here yet. And can't wait to see you guys either Thursday morning. Otherwise, I'll see you again on Sunday. Thanks so much. God bless. We'll see you soon.